Yasin was living with his family downstairs in apartment 4, while Josie Hadass apparently lived upstairs in apartment 8.
At least some of the people there today tried to shift the blame for the bombing away from the Palestinian suspects in custody, Mohammed Salameh and Nidal Ayad, and turn the blame to Israel. This paper handed out at the rally claims Salameh rented the van of death to do work for an Israeli Secret Service agent.
However, one of many things that this 60 Minutes interview does not ask and fails to explain is that once Yasin fled back to Iraq, investigators subsequently tried to draw him back to the US, some with the aim of questioning him further, and some in the belief that he should be arrested. But the channel of communication that's not being explained here is that Yasin's older brother, Musab Yasin, who was 34, a PhD student in electrical engineering at the City University of New York, who also taught electrical engineering at Hudson County Community College, and was repeatedly brought to the New Jersey FBI office to telephone his brother Abdul Yasin in Baghdad. Musab was told to say that authorities wanted Yasin to return just to ask him a few more questions. Only after local authorities finally came to the conclusion that their efforts to lure Yasin back were fruitless did they make the decision to indict him on August 4, 1993, some 5 months after the bombing. Yasin, who was 32 at the time of the bombing, is also an epileptic and actually had a seizure while being questioned by the FBI, which might have worked in his favor in gaining sympathy and subsequently being let go. But Yasin ostensibly came in the U.S. for medical treatment for his epileptic condition, arriving in New York in early September 1992. However, there are some peculiar circumstances to both his brother and his living arrangement at apartment 4, 34 Kensington Avenue, when looking for the entirety of Yasin's profile and background, primarily being the marital status of his parents, as no information is available as to what ethnicity their mother actually was, and when she first moved into the apartment with Musab, nor any exact information where their father was living at the time. It was reported that city taxi records showed that Musab Yasin had a hack license from 1984 to 1990, and only lived in Iraq for 4 years. In fact, when Yusuf and Salameh were injured from the car accident on January 24, 1993, they gave hospital officials their address as being Musab and Abdul Yasin's apartment 4 on 34 Kensington Avenue, downstairs from their previous residence reportedly shared with Josie Hadass. And apparently, the vehicle Salameh and Yusuf were in during their auto accident was a car previously owned by Musab, who had recently transferred the registration under their names, which was originally issued to an additional Brooklyn address of his. According to the New York Times on May 26, 1993, 2 days before the bombing, Mr. Salameh was still being taught how to drive the van. According to court papers citing an FBI confidential informant who did the teaching, federal authorities say that they are now searching for the informer and his brother. They say the 2 men are missing and may be in Iraq. One of the 2, according to an investigator, is Musab Yasin, an Iraqi who taught engineering and briefly shared an apartment with Mr. Salameh. But when it comes to newspaper coverage, there was one source which couldn't seem to let go of examining all the inconsistencies of those arrested and questioned from the apartment building, even deeming it as the bombing plotter's den, was New York's Newsday in an article on June 17, 1993, which had also pointed out that the Palestinian cab driver Bilal Al-Qazi had also lived there at one time, describing the place as 2 cramped Jersey City apartments strewn with mattresses, books, Arabic newspapers, and fundamentalist sermons. They were students and cab drivers, men who work in stores and on construction sites, and that neighbors in the tidy working class area of Jersey City, New Jersey, were surprised that the kind, polite, helpful tenants could have had a more menacing agenda. They were polite and nice, said an elderly neighbor. They always help me with the grocery bags. The article states that they lifted fingerprints from at least 10 other people who they haven't been able to identify and who could be tied to the bombing. What those ancillary figures have told the FBI has never been released. The 2 brothers at least initially cooperated with agents and led them to the bombers' alleged makeshift laboratory before leaving the country for Iraq. The modest address became so pivotal that one law enforcement agent dubbed it the Conspirators' Den. There were a lot of people who lived there, said one law enforcement official early in the investigation. We're not sure how wide the circle goes, but we believe there were a number of people who knew what was going on. Early in the investigations, agent was sure of one thing. The residents of apartment 4 took extraordinary pains to maintain their anonymity. Neighbors in public documents revealed that a former waiter and city taxicab driver named Mohammed F. Mohammed rented the 3-room flat on the first floor 2 years ago when he moved to New Jersey from Long Island City in Queens. Mohammed has since been evicted and couldn't be located for comment. According to neighbors, Mohammed's apartment gradually became a safe harbor for impoverished young men with ties to the Middle East. Neighbors say as many as 20 others use apartment 4 and apartment 8 upstairs, holding meetings and prayers and eating large communal meals. Neighbors said that Salome, 25, the first bombing suspect arrested, lived in number 8, then moved downstairs to number 4, Muhammad's $560 a month apartment. This turned out to be misinformation, likely based on mixed accounts from suspects and witnesses that later changed their stories. In early reports, Musab Yasin claimed ownership to wires and electronic devices left over between both apartments, rather than Salome owning it, which at some early point in the investigation, items left over were being used as evidence to convict him. But clearly, from what's been uncovered so far, even from the 60 Minutes piece, the Yasin family were certainly living in downstairs apartment number 4 during the Trade Center bombing. But continuing with the article, the men in apartments 4 and 8 were so close, added Mary Mulpeter, a longtime resident, that they rigged up an intercom between them. About 2 months before the bombing, the men in apartment 8 moved out. Frank Ferrari, the owner of the building, insisted that no more than 2 or 3 people lived in either apartment, and said the FBI asked him to withhold the names of the tenants. On the next page towards the end, 2 other men in apartment 4 came under scrutiny by the FBI after Salome's arrest, March 4. Musab and Abdul Yasin were born in Indianapolis with relatives in Iraq. Both lived for several years in Baghdad, investigators said. 2 days before the explosion, Abdul Yasin taught Salome, the suspect who allegedly transported the bomb to New York in a Ryder van, how to operate a similar type of van, court papers say. He also took agents to a nearby garage apartment where traces of the chemicals used in the bomb and laboratory equipment were found. Then Abdul went to Iraq and has declined to return, his brother Musab said. Through a spokesman, Dr. M.T. Mehdi, Musab Yasin and Abdul left with full knowledge of the FBI. Musab, 34, until last year, was a PhD candidate in electrical engineering at the City College of New York in Manhattan, said he continues to cooperate with the FBI. Through Mehdi, Musab Yasin said he created the fictitious Josie Hadass, the name in which the telephone at apartment 4 was listed, and a character some suspects' supporters claimed really planned the bombing. He told Mehdi he made up the name in order to keep his engineering students at CUNY from calling his house. However, the phone bill in that name was not sent to 34 Kensington. It was mailed to the Brooklyn address where Yusuf registered his car. A man at the apartment declined to comment. Although things already seem very nefarious when it comes to Musab and him fleeing back to Iraq sometime after his brother, what's rather peculiar is his continued channel of communication, and that he chose his spokesman to be M.T. Mehdi, if not Mehdi himself choosing or volunteering to intervene, especially since he's an Iraqi himself. But continuing with the Yasins, this detail with Musab using the Hadass name tied in with the phone number in the downstairs apartment differs from the early reports, with the name instead being used for the upstairs address with Salome and others. Musab's reason makes no sense, and his alibi is quite troublesome in contrast to the already aforementioned known Mossad name through Arab circles. Musab also gave conflicting information when he resided at that New Jersey apartment. Musab claims he first moved into the apartment about September 1992, but his name, address, and phone number appear in the January publishing of the New Jersey telephone book in 1992, before he changed it to Josie Hadass in August. According to what Musab told 2 newspapers, as well as a sworn affidavit, that he had already known Salome for a couple of years, and at one time first lived with him in apartment 4, before Salome moved upstairs to apartment 8, eventually becoming roommates with Bilal Al-Qazi at one point and Ramzi Youssef. And based on the information that was publicly available at this point, before 9/11 and the subsequent CBS 60 Minutes interview 9 months later, it may very well seem that Musab may have been handling, or at least was a secondary influence for his brother Abdul Yasin, to be involved or introduced in the circles of the Trade Center bombing conspiracy. But continuing with Leslie Stahl's 60 Minutes report on Yasin,